Hello, dear listeners. This is part 5 of my reading of the Project 2025 book, Madness, Fiasco. When you've got over 100 authors, I think it's kind of hard to say it's a reputable book. I'm on page 76 of 920, and that's the PDF pages. Who knows how tiny this font is on a real book. As previously, I'm not going to edit out any of my weird mouth noises, pronunciation mistakes, or any of that nonsense. You're just going to get it all raw. Here we go. U.S. Office of Management and Budget, OMB. OMB assists the President in the execution of his policy agenda across the government by employing many statutory and executive procedural levers to bring the bureaucracy in line with all budgetary, regulatory, and management decisions. Properly understood, it is a President's air traffic control system with the ability and charge to ensure that all policy initiatives are flying in sync and with the authority to let planes take off and, at times, ground planes that are flying off course. Oh boy, this is going to be another one of those sections where they're still trying to educate you because you clearly don't know how government works because you're an uneducated nit. OMB's key roles include developing and enforcing the President's budget and executing the appropriations laws that fund the government, managing agency and personnel performance, procurement policy, financial management, and information technology. And yes, I have had 2 shots, by the way. We're having a Crown Royal Vanilla with Pink Lady Apple Kombucha and sparkling water tonight. You really don't think I'm going to read these sober, do you? Managing agency and personnel performance, procurement policy, financial management, and information technology. Developing the President's regulatory agenda, reviewing new regulatory actions, reviewing federal information collections, and setting and enforcing federal information policy, and coordinating and clearing agency communications with Congress, including testimonies and views on draft legislation. OMB cannot perform its role on behalf of the President effectively if it is not intimately involved in all aspects of the White House policy process and lacks knowledge of what the agencies are doing. Internally to the EOP, ensuring that the policy formulation procedures developed by the White House to serve the President include OMB is one of any OMB director's major responsibilities. A common meme of those who intend to evade... They're talking about memes? A common meme of those who intend to evade OMB review is to argue that where resources, in quotation marks, are not being discussed, OMB's participation is optional. This ignores both OMB's role in all downstream execution and the reality that it has only the statutory tools in the White House that are powerful enough to override implementing agencies' bureaucracies. Again, with the whole "the White House has all the power" line. The director, capitalized, must view his job as the best, most comprehensive approximation of the President's mind as it pertains to the policy agenda, while always being ready with actual options to effect that agenda within existing legal authorities and resources. This role cannot be performed adequately if the director acts instead as the ambassador of the institutional interests of OMB and the wider bureaucracy to the White House. Once its reputation as the keeper of commander's intent is established, then and only then does OMB have the ability to shape the most efficient way to pursue an objective. Externally, the director must ensure that OMB has sufficient visibility into the deep caverns of agency decision-making. One indispensable statutory tool to that end is to ensure that policy officials, the program associate directors, PADs, managing the vast resource management offices, RMOs, personally sign what are known as the apportionments. In 1870, Congress passed the Anti-Deficiency Act to prevent the common agency practice of spending down all appropriated funding, creating artificial funding shortfalls that Congress would have to fill. The law mandated that all funding be allotted or apportioned in installments. This process, whereby agencies come to OMB for allotments of appropriated funding, is essential to the effective financial stewardship of taxpayer dollars. OMB can then direct on behalf of a president the amount, duration, and purpose of any apportioned funding to ensure against waste, fraud, and abuse, and ensure consistency with the president's agenda and applicable laws. The vast majority of these apportionments were signed by career officials, the Deputy Associate Directors, DADs, until the Trump administration placed this responsibility in the hand of the PADs. Remember what that means? And thereby opened wide vistas of oversight that had escaped the attention of policy officials. The Biden administration subsequently reversed this decision. No director should be chosen who is unwilling to restore apportionment decision-making to the PAD's personal review, who is not aggressive in wielding the tool on behalf of the president's agenda, or who is unable to defend the power against attacks from Congress. It should be noted that each of OMB's primary functions, along with other executive and statutory roles, is carried out with the help of many essential OMB support offices. The two most important offices for moving OMB at the will of a director are the Budget Review Division, BRD, and the Office of General Counsel, OGC. The director should have a direct and effective relationship with the head of the BRD, considered the top career official within OMB, and transmit most instructions through that office because the rest of the agency is institutionally inclined toward its direction and responds accordingly. The BRD inevitably will translate the directions from policy officials to the career staff, and at every stage, it is obviously vital that the director, capitalized, ensure that this translation is an accurate one. In addition, many key considerations involved in enacting a president's agenda hinge on existing legal authorities. The director must ensure the appointment of a general counsel who is respected, yet creative and fearless in his or her ability to challenge legal precedents that serve to protect the status quo. This is vital within OMB, not only with respect to the adequate development of policy options for the president's review, but also with respect to agencies that attempt to protect their own institutional interests and foreclose certain avenues based on the mere assertion and not proof that the law disallows it, or that, conversely, attempt to disregard the clear statutory commands of Congress. Translation: law isn't law and Congress doesn't have power. In general, the director should empower a strong deputy director with authority over the Deputy for Management, the PADs, and the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, the OIRA, to work diligently to break down barriers within OMB and not allow turf disputes or a lack of visibility to undermine the agency's principal budget, management, and regulatory functions. Oh, we get to write our own checks. OMB should work toward a one OMB position on behalf of the president and represent that view during the various policymaking processes. Budget. The United States today faces an untenable fiscal situation and owes $31 trillion on a debt that is steadily increasing. By the way, there's no citation for that, so there's no proof that that number even exists. The OMB director should present a fiscal goal to the president early in the budget development process to address the federal government's fiscal irresponsibility. This goal would help to align the months-long process of developing the actual proposals for inclusion in the budget. Though some mistakenly regard it as a mere paper-pushing exercise, the president's budget is in fact a powerful mechanism for setting and enforcing public policy at federal agencies. The budget team includes 6 resource management offices that, together with the BRD and other components, help the director of OMB to develop and execute detailed agency spending plans that bear on every major aspect of policy formation and execution at federal agencies. Through initial priority setting and ongoing supervision of agency spending, OMB's budget team plays a key role in executing policy across the executive branch, including at many agencies wrongly regarded as independent. this entire section is just reinforcing their belief that the president and his team can override all other government function. The RMOs, each of which is led by a political appointee known as the PAD and a career DAD, are separated into 6 functional units: national security, national resources, energy and science, health, education, income maintenance and labor, transportation, justice and homeland security, treasury, commerce, housing. Because the RMOs are institutionally ingrained in nearly all policymaking and implementation across the executive branch, they play a critical role in helping the director to implement the president's public policy agenda. However, because each RMO is responsible for formulating and supervising such a wide range of policy details, many granular but critical policy decisions are effectively left to the career professionals who serve across administrations, which is capitalized for some reason. To enhance the OMB director's ability to help the president drive policy at the agencies, the existing 6 RMOs should be divided into smaller subject matter areas, allowing for more PADs. And each of these PADs should have a deputy PAD. This expanded pool of RMOs, with additional political leadership, would enable more comprehensive direction and oversight of policy development and implementation. Regardless of whether Congress adopts the president's full set of budget recommendations, the president should reintroduce the concept of administrative pay-as-you-go or administrative pay-go, P-A-Y-G-O. This simple procedural requirement imposes budget neutrality on the discretionary choices of federal agencies, of which there are many in nearly all areas of policymaking. This simple step forces the executive branch to control what it can control. The principle may occasionally yield to other overarching requirements, such as a presidential regulatory budget, but in nearly all cases, administrative pay-go plays a unique and indispensable role in enforcing fiscal responsibility at federal departments and agencies. The president should use every possible tool to propose and impose fiscal discipline on the federal government. Anything short of that would constitute abject failure. Management. The Management Office of OMB, the M side as it is often called, is responsible for carrying out several important agency oversight functions, many of which are statutory. The management team includes the following offices led by presidentially appointed Senate-confirmed individuals: the Office of Federal Procurement Policy, OFPP, the Office of Performance and Personnel Management, OPPM, the Office of Federal Financial Management, OFFM, the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer, OFCIO, the Made in America Office, MIAO, which was added by the Biden administration and is not a Senate-confirmed slot. Each of these offices has responsibilities and authorities that a president can use to help drive policy across the government. It is vital that the director and his political staff, not the careerists, drive these offices in pursuit of the president's actual priorities and not let them set their own agenda based on the wishes of the sprawling, good government management community in and outside of government. Many directors do not properly prioritize the management portfolio, leaving it to the deputy for management, but such neglect creates purposeless bureaucracy that impedes a president's agenda, an M-train to nowhere. I'm sure whoever wrote that felt brave. OFPP. This office plays a critical role in the leading of the development of new policies and regulations concerning federal contracting and procurement. Through the Federal Acquisition Regulatory Council, which is generally chaired by the OFPP administrator, OFPP helps the director to set a wide range of policies for all of those who contract with the executive branch. In the past, those government-wide contracting rules have played a key role in helping to implement the president's policy agenda. This office should be engaged early and often in OMB's effort to drive policy, including by obtaining transparency about entities that are awarded federal contracts and grants, and by using government contracts to push back against woke policies in corporate America. You like the way they sneak in all those little guidelines to just basically ignore the law and precedent? Restarting again from OPPM. OPPM. Through this office, the director helps federal agencies to establish their performance goals and performance review processes. OPPM also works with the U.S. Office of Personnel Management, OPM, to establish and manage personnel policies and practices across the federal government. The director should instruct OPPM to establish annual performance goals and review processes for agencies that reflect the president's agenda. OPPM should also be part of the president's strategy to set and enforce sensible policies and practices for the federal workforce. OFFM. This office helps the director to root out waste, fraud, and abuse in federal programs. For example, through the Do Not Pay program. It should be part of efforts to save precious taxpayer resources. OFCIO. This office guides the federal government's use and adoption of internet-based technologies to improve government operations and save taxpayer money. As a function of its leadership role, it is critical in interagency discussions on a wide range of technology issues. The office, thus, is an important part of the President's efforts to modernize, strengthen, and set technology adoption policy for the executive branch. MIAO. Building on the example and work of the Trump administration, President Biden established this office to centralize, carry out, and further develop the federal government's Buy American and other Made in America commitments. Its work ought to be continued and further strengthened. Did they just admit Biden did something right? On page 81 of 920? Yes, they did. Regulatory and information policy. OMB's OIRA plays an enormous and vital role in reining in the regulatory state and ensuring that regulations achieve important benefits while imposing minimal burdens on Americans. The President should maintain Executive Order 12866, the foundation of OIRA's review of regulatory actions. The administration should likewise maintain the recent extension of those standards to regulatory actions of the U.S. Department of the Treasury. Regulatory analysis and OIRA review should also be required of the historically independent quotation mark agencies, as the Office of Legal Counsel has found is legally permissible. If the current administration proceeds with its declared intent to modify aspects of EO 12866 or review OMB Circular A4, the related document that provides the foundation for cost-benefit analysis, the next president should immediately begin to undo those changes and develop a rigorous, data-driven approach that will result in the least burdensome rules possible. The next president should also revive the directive in Executive Order 13891 that significant guidance documents must also pass through an OIRA review. Because OIRA review often leads to fewer regulatory burdens, more regulatory benefits, and better coordination of regulatory policy, funding for OIRA tends to pay large dividends. Yet over the years, funding for OIRA has diminished. This trend should be reversed. The budget should also include sufficient full-time equivalent FTE employees to form regulatory advance teams that would consult with agencies on cost-benefit analysis and good regulatory practices at the beginning of the rulemaking process for the most important regulations. These teams would help agencies take cost-benefit analysis into account from the beginning of their rulemaking efforts, which in turn would result in higher quality regulations and a swifter eventual OIRA review. To preserve the integrity of OIRA review, the staff who consult at the beginning of a rulemaking should not handle its eventual review. The next president should also reinstate the many executive orders signed by President Trump that were designed to make the regulatory process more just, efficient, and transparent. Executive Orders 13771, 13777, 13891, 13892, 13893, 13924 Section 6, 13979, and 13980 should be revived with modifications as needed. I should make a note, there is an annotation for every single one of those listed sections, and there's absolutely no way I'm going to read them all right now, but I guarantee they're all nonsense that Biden got rid of on purpose. Executive Order 13132 on federalism should be strengthened so that state regulatory and fiscal operations are not commandeered by the federal government through so-called cooperative federalism programs. Additionally, the president should revise and sign an updated version of President Ronald Reagan's Executive Order 12630 on federal takings. Okay, that one I want to see, because why are they specifically going way back to Reagan on that one? Governmental actions and interference with constitutionally protected property rights, March 15th, 1988. And then there's a link to a PDF about it on regulationwriters.com. The next president should strengthen implementation of the Information Quality Act, to robustly use the authority of the Paperwork Reduction Act, carefully enforce the Privacy Act, and ensure the sound execution of OIRA's statistical and other information policy functions. Regulatory cooperation agreements can also promote the further adoption of good regulatory practices, which improve market conditions for America and her allies. OIRA should also work with other components of OMB to revise and apply OMB's uniform guidance for grants and agreements, and ensure that federal contract and grant guidelines satisfy EO 12866 and other centralized standards as appropriate. Everything Trump did in his first term was awesome. Why'd you take it away? But executive reforms and actions, while vital, are not enough. Congress also must act. The next president should work with Congress to pass significant regulatory policy and process reforms, which could go a long way toward reining in the administrative state. Excellent examples of such legislation include the Regulatory Accountability Act, the SMART Act, the GOOD Act, Early Participation in Regulations Act, Unfunded Mandates Accountability and Transparency Act, and the REINS Act, REINS. Finally, the next president should work with Congress to maximize the utility of the Congressional Review Act, which allows Congress to undo midnight regulatory actions, include those disguised as guidance, on an accelerated timeline. To leverage the CRA's power to the maximum extent, Congress and the President should enact the Midnight Rules Relief Act, which would help to ensure that multiple regulatory actions could be packaged and voted at the same time. Immediate and robust use of the CRA would allow the President to focus his rulemaking resources on major new regulatory reforms, rather than devoting months or years to undoing the final rulemakings of the Biden administration. Legislative clearance and coordination. OMB plays a critical role in ensuring that the executive branch is aligned on legislative proposals and language, agency testimonies, and other communications with Congress. The director should use these authorities to enforce policy and message consistency aggressively, and promote the effective engagement of the executive branch in legislative process. Never mind that every bill has to be signed by the president, you weirdies. National Security Council, NSC. The National Security Council, NSC, was established by statute to support the president in developing and implementing national security policy by coordinating across relevant departments and agencies, integrating authorities and resources toward common ends, and objectively assessing progress toward established goals. Led by the National Security Advisor, NSA, the NSC staff will be successful in implementing the President's national security goals only if it is made up of personnel with technical expertise and experience, as well as an alignment to the President's declared national security policy priorities. The NSC must then chart a course that articulates and achieves the President's national security goals and objectives. The President should empower a strong NSC that not only has the power to convene the policy process, but also is entrusted with the full power of the presidency to drive the bureaucracy. In organizing, by means of presidential directive, an NSC staff that is more responsive and aligned with the president's goals and empowered to implement them, the NSA should immediately evaluate and eliminate directorates that are not aligned with the president's agenda and replace them with new directorates, as appropriate, that can drive implementation of the president's signature national security priorities. In addition to realigning the staff organization to the president's priorities, the NSA should assign responsibility for the implementation of specific policy initiatives to senior NSC officials from across the NSC staff structure. These officials should develop, direct, and execute tangible action plans in coordination with multiple agencies to achieve measurable, time-defined milestones. Every paragraph in this thing is like a brand new directive. You don't know whether you're coming or going on some of these things. Aligning NSC staff to the President's national security goals will provide clearer direction, a mandate for action, and a baseline of accountability that can be used to evaluate staff performance and the NSC's overall progress. Didn't I just say all these directives seem to be confusing and contradictory and layered and not quite that simple at all? Yes, I did just say that. It's almost as if whoever wrote this knew somebody would say that, and so they're saying, no, really, this will work. Accountable senior officials, themselves either political appointees or a minimum number of career detailees, who are selected and vetted politically and report directly to political staff, should be the main day-to-day managers for interagency coordination and implementation of their assigned national security policy objectives. They should provide policy analysis for consideration by the broader NSC and relevant agencies and ensure timely responses to decisions made by the President. The accountable senior officials should be established at the direction of the NSA and draw on personnel and experience from beyond the NSC, including OMB, the National Economic Council, and relevant federal agencies. The NSC staff and principals should work in tandem with the National Economic Council and OMB at all levels, presenting a united effort to achieve the President's goals and drawing on the latter's statutory authorities to guide the bureaucracy. To accomplish national objectives effectively, foreign policy should fully incorporate the economic instruments of national power. National security policy must also include the prioritized allocation of resources. When policies are divorced from the resources required to implement, they are stillborn academic exercises that undermine our national security and leave departments and agencies to their own devices. The accountable senior officials should be empowered to identify, recruit, clear, and hire staff who are aligned with and willing to shepherd the President's national security policies. NSC staff leads, under the direction of the NSA, should have the discretion to reduce the number of positions that need high-level clearances, and the NSC should be adequately resourced and authorized to adjudicate and hold security clearances internally with investigators who work directly for the NSC and whose sole task is to clear NSC officials. If certain staff are determined not to need high-level clearances, the question becomes whether they should be part of the NSC at all. The NSC should take a leading role in directing the drafting and thorough review of all formal strategies. The National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, the Nuclear Posture Review, the Missile Defense Strategy, etc. In particular, the National Defense Strategy, which by tradition has evaded significant review, should be prioritized for White House review by the NSC and OMB. Both should also conduct reviews of operational war plans and global force planning and allocations with the Secretary of Defense to align them with presidential priorities and review all key policy and guidance intended for implementation by the heads of the Department of Defense, the Department of State, and the intelligence community before they are authorized for distribution. The NSC should rigorously review all general and flag officer promotions to prioritize the core roles and responsibilities of the military over social engineering and non-defense matters, including climate change, critical race theory, manufactured extremism, and other polarizing policies that weaken our armed forces and discourage our nation's finest men and women from enlisting to serve in defense of our liberty. The NSC staff will need to consolidate the functions of both the NSC and the Homeland Security Council, HSC, incorporate the recently established Office of the National Cyber Director, and evaluate the required regional and functional directorates. Given the aforementioned prerequisites, the NSC should be properly resourced with sufficient policy professionals, and the NSA should prioritize staffing the vast majority of NSC directorates with aligned political appointees and trusted career officials. For instance, the NSA should return all non-essential detainees to their home agencies on their first day in office so that the new administration can proceed efficiently without the personnel landmines left by the previous stewards, and as soon as possible should replace all essential detailees with staff aligned to the new president's priorities. The HSC has overseen pandemic response, and its incorporation is important. In the end, change requires intervention, and the NSC staff should be appropriately recruited, manned, and empowered to achieve the president's national security and foreign policy objectives and maintain robust policy analysis and discussion while minimizing resistance from those who have an agenda. Like you don't have an agenda. Or who jealously guard their resources and autonomy at the expense of national security and sound policy development. Writes the person who wants to give all power to the White House. This resistance and inertia can be inadvertently enabled by a small and unempowered NSC. Additionally, the White House Chief of Staff and NSA must ensure that the NSC is functioning in tandem with the rest of the White House staff to benefit from the best strategic thinking of the president's top advisors. History shows that an unsupervised NSC staff can stray from its statutory role and adversely affect a president and his policies. Moreover, while the NSC should be fully incorporated into the White House, it should also be allowed to do its job without the impediment of duly hatted staff that report to other offices. For instance, the NSC needs its own counsel to inform what legal options can be provided to the president. The White House counsel should be part of that policy process as the president's top legal advisor. These recommendations provide a clear roadmap for rapidly sizing and solidifying the NSC staff to support and achieve the president's objectives, beginning on Inauguration Day. And that's about 30 minutes. That's about all I can take. They're leaning into the whole president can do no wrong. We must replace anyone who works in government who doesn't completely support Trump. And keep in mind, this was written 2 years ago, 2023, 2.5 years ago. I'll try and get part 6 out within a couple days. This one took a few days because I had some physical injuries to deal with. Next up is called the National Economic Council. Page 85 of 920. This recording and all other recordings related to this Project 2025 reading are copyrighted by Douglas Wayne Ricketts. All rights reserved. Unless you agree with me that Project 2025 sucks, then please feel free to use as much of this reading as you want. Thanks for listening.